When you hear the word globalization, your mind probably jumps to the internet, right? Or maybe those giant container ships crisscrossing the ocean. You think of the world we live in now. But what if I told you the story of how our world got so connected is way older, a lot messier, and honestly, so much more dramatic than you think? Let's get into it.
So, the big question is, when did this all really start? It's easy to think of globalization as a new thing, a product of our lifetime. But the truth is, the threads connecting all of us stretch back for centuries, even thousands of years. The story of our interconnected world is an ancient one.
Just look at these two images. On the left, you've got a ship carving from 1,000 years ago. And on the right, a jam-packed ship of people moving to a new country in the 1800s. The technology is worlds apart, obviously, but that fundamental human drive to travel, to trade, to find a new life across the oceans, that's a constant thread running right through our history. Okay, to really get this, we have to go way back, long before the modern era. See, the world before the 1500s wasn't just a bunch of isolated civilizations. It was already a web of ancient connections, a network that laid the groundwork for absolutely everything that was about to come. What you're looking at here are the original global highways, the Silk Roads. And this wasn't just one road, not at all. It was this massive, sprawling network of routes over land and sea that knitted together huge parts of Asia and linked them all the way to Europe and North Africa for centuries.
So, what was actually moving across these incredible distances? You might think of spices or silk, and you'd be right, but it was so much more than just stuff to sell. It was an exchange that would literally change the course of cultures and societies forever.
Of course, you had the luxury goods, right? Silk from China, spices from India. You had gold and silver flowing from Europe to Asia. But think about this. Powerful ideas, entire religions like Buddhism and Christianity and Islam, they all spread along these same paths. Even our food traveled. It's thought that noodles made their way west from China and eventually became what we know as spaghetti. But, and this is crucial, so did germs and disease, the very first signs of a darker side to being so connected.
And the movement of food could change everything. Take the humble potato. When it was brought from the Americas to Europe, it was a game changer. Suddenly, the poor could eat better and live longer. But it also created this incredible vulnerability. In Ireland, people became so dependent on the potato that when a disease wiped out the crop in the 1840s, hundreds of thousands of people starved to death. It was a brutal lesson in the risks of this new global food chain.
Then we hit the 1500s, and everything changes. This is a massive turning point, a violent, dramatic acceleration in how the world was connected. European voyages to the Americas didn't just add a few new routes to the map, they completely and permanently redrew it.
You could say that after European sailors found sea routes to Asia and the Americas, the world effectively shrank. For centuries, the center of global trade had been the Indian Ocean. Now, that center of gravity slowly but surely shifted west. Europe, which had kind of been on the sidelines, suddenly found itself at the very hub of this new global trade. But here's the thing about the European conquest. It wasn't just one with swords and guns. In fact, their most powerful weapon was completely invisible. It was germs. Diseases like smallpox, which they'd been living with for centuries, were totally new to the Americas. The native people had absolutely no immunity, and these diseases just tore through their communities, wiping out millions and paving the way for conquest. And the sheer brutality of this time is right there in the words of the conquerors themselves. Listen to this from John Winthrop, an early governor in New England. He saw the plague that killed so many native people not as a horrible tragedy, but as a blessing from God, clearing their title to the land. It's just a chilling justification for a demographic catastrophe. And this newly connected world was built on an unimaginable amount of suffering. The huge plantations in the Americas, growing things like sugar and cotton for European markets, were worked by millions of enslaved Africans. They were captured, forced onto ships, and transported across the Atlantic in the horrifying slave trade. This new global network was fueled by forced labor. All right, now let's jump forward to the 1800s. This period was an incredible acceleration. This is when technology, big money, and colonialism all came together to create a truly global economy at a speed that nobody in human history had ever seen before. So economists talk about three big flows that really defined this era. First, the flow of trade. Think goods like grain and cotton just circling the globe. Second, the flow of labor. You had millions of people migrating for work. And third, the flow of capital.
Money from big financial centers like London was funding stuff like railways and mines all over the world. The sheer scale of people on the move was staggering. In the 19th century, nearly 50 million people packed up and left Europe for places like America and Australia. A huge driver for this was a big economic shift in Britain. They got rid of their corn laws, which were basically taxes on imported food. So imported food got way cheaper, which was great for city dwellers, but it put tons of local farmers out of work, forcing them to look for a new life overseas.
But it wasn't just Europeans. If you zoom out and look at the whole world, historians estimate that something like 150 million people left their homes during this time. They crossed oceans and continents, all searching for a better future. It was one of the biggest migrations in all of human history.
And technology was the engine behind so much of this. This is a perfect example. Before the 1870s, you had to ship live animals across the Atlantic. It was expensive, it was inefficient, and it meant meat was a total luxury. Then, the refrigerated ship was invented. And just like that, animals could be processed in America and the frozen meat could be shipped to Europe, causing prices to plummet. This one invention completely changed what poor families in Europe could afford to eat.
But, there was a much darker side to all this integration. In 1885, the big European powers all met in Berlin and literally carved up Africa for themselves. I mean, look at this map. You see those straight lines? Some of those borders are perfectly straight because they were drawn with rulers on a map in a room in Europe with absolutely no thought given to the actual people who live there.
And that flow of labor we talked about, it often wasn't a choice. This is a quote from an indentured laborer from India. Millions of people like him were sent all over the world to work on plantations and railways under these brutal contracts. A lot of people called it a new system of slavery, where people were just trapped in horrible conditions with basically no rights. So you see, this deeply connected world didn't just create incredible wealth and opportunity, it also created massive fragility. The very networks that tied the world together so tightly meant that a crisis in one corner of the globe could now become a total catastrophe for everyone.
And the First World War was the terrifying result. It was the first modern industrial war. The same industrial might that built railways and ships was now turned to mass destruction. Machine guns, tanks, chemical weapons, all used on a massive scale. 9 million people were killed.
The war completely shattered the global economy. After it ended in 1918, things were really shaky. In the 1920s, the U.S. economy was booming, and it was lending money all over the world. But that whole boom was built on a very fragile foundation of credit. And in 1929, that foundation just crumbled, kicking off the Great Depression. And when the U.S. economy went down, it created this massive domino effect. American banks started demanding their loans back from Europe, businesses failed, international trade just evaporated, and unemployment went through the roof all over the world. The crisis showed everyone just how deeply interconnected and how dangerously interdependent the world had become.
Which of course brings us to today. Our world is connected in ways that people a century ago couldn't even have dreamed of. What this whole long story shows us is that globalization has always been a two-sided coin. It's a story of incredible creativity and opportunity, but it's also a story of violence, of inequality, and of crisis. So the question for us, living in this hyper-connected world, is what lessons can we take from all the promises and all the perils of the past?